Okay, we are back to talk about Severance Season 2 questions, theories, predictions, things to look forward to as we wait for Season 3. Just as a quick recap of where we are and how Season 2 ended. As the season of Severance came to a close, we saw Cobell and Devin come up with a plan to help Mark S. save Gemma. We saw James Egan tell Helly R. that he sees Kier in her. Lumen management, such as Mr. Drummond, Dr. Maurer, gathered to see Mark complete the Cold Harbor file. Helly and Dylan trap Mr. Milchick in a restroom and then recruit a marching band to their any rights cause. Lauren and Mark killed Mr. Drummond before the goat sacrifice ritual. Mark S. did rescue Gemma from the testing floor after completing Cold Harbor, but refused to leave the severed floor with her, instead running off with Helly R. to some kind of unknown future. Meanwhile, Irving, still off on a train in parts unknown. Dr. Ragavi has not been seen in several episodes. We don't know what Miss Cobell's plan is ultimately. Rickon must be still be working on his book. We haven't seen him in a while. Miss Swan has been shipped off to Svalbard. Any number of other little tiny details we may be forgetting. So many questions left outstanding, so many things to talk about. What's the one big question or idea you want to start with?
So I want to start with Helly. Just to make sure everyone knows what we're doing here, we kind of agreed that what we're going to do on this week's podcast is to not only talk about lingering questions and theories that we have, but also try to gather them from the world a bit. I'm sure we're not being comprehensive here.
Mhm.
I did watch various YouTubers who, I have been watching some of these folks along the way and never mentioned them. I had the idea of, that maybe we want to cite sources. I don't know if that's quite going to work though, because for the most part, I don't have people endorsing these
Right,
theories,
right.
but more doing what we're doing in terms of raising the theory and talking about it or what have you. So,
And so many of these ideas are so proliferated everywhere. I mean, it'd be hard to give original credit to who came up with this theory.
right. But like if someone was endorsing it, if someone was saying, like, I believe this is true, here's my
Yeah,
argument,
yeah.
that's not so much what's happening. But I'll give a quick shout out to a couple YouTube channels, Geek Academy. I enjoy Pete Peppers, Miscellaneous Gab. I also watched the Think Story video on this one, which is one of those like 25 wild theories about Severance. Okay, so those are my sources. Those are, I don't know if you have any you want to mention before we get going.
Oh gosh, any number, specifically thinking about the official
Yeah,
uh
that too.
Severance podcast. I'd have to pull together a list. Maybe I'll try to do it for our page for this podcast. I've probably tried to catch at least pieces of 10 or 12 different podcasts this week, people talking about it, people theorizing about it, looking at Reddit threads. So it's just kind of all over the place. But I'll try to collate something together for that.
That's fine. Again, I mean, it seems to me like I would feel most obligated to cite a source if it really was like this is this person's theory that they laid
Yeah.
out, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas most of these are not quite that, at least in terms of things that I've read. Like you could probably find someone on Reddit who's laying out the argument or whatever, I suppose. Regardless, let's start with Helly because this one pissed me off. Like I want to start with the theory that makes me angry. Um, that could also be true.
Hmm.
The point is just that I will be mad if it is true. And this is the theory that at the end of season two, that it's Helena, Egan, and not Helly. What do you think about this one, Ryan?
Um, Hogwash, basically ridiculous. That's my sort of initial impression, and I think that there's an intention of why James Egan was on the floor talking to her specifically as Helly R to sort of ground us in the fact that that's who that is. Now, could that have changed in the moments in between that conversation and when we see her with Mark later? Sure, that could have happened. But we have James Egan coming to her and saying, you, Heliar, I see Kira in you. That at least tells us that she was on that floor working with Mark at some point during this whole process. And I'm just choosing to believe, I guess, that that's the person who it is at the end.
Okay, so I'll make the case.
Okay.
And actually, I feel like, well, I saw various people talking about the possibility. I don't know that they would, I don't know that any of them quite made the case as well as it started forming in my own mind, for whatever that's worth. Because it did seem like a lot of people were
Hmm.
somewhat in line with what you were saying, suggesting like, oh, maybe something happened in between what we saw where she became. No, I mean, I think that if there were any chance that this were actually the case, it would have to be Helena all throughout
Mm.
the events of the finale, except for what you mentioned with Jane. Now,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm pretty sure that was that the previous day or was that the beginning of this day?
I thought that
Mm,
that was all arriving on the same day. I thought it was right before Mark came in and finished
I think it
Cold
was
Harbor, but I could be wrong.
I think it was the previous day, right? I
Okay,
think that
okay.
that is in, parallel with when Mark is in the cabin on the previous day. Okay, I'd have to double check
Okay.
that because that could be of some importance to how I'm thinking about building this theory, which I do not endorse and do not want to be true.
Hmm.
But so if that was the previous day, which is what I think, and you have James telling Helior, Danny Helior, that he doesn't love um, his daughter, the Audi Helior,
Yeah,
but he sees the fire of Kier in her or whatever, right? Now I'm imagining that Audi Helena is watching or watches later, as we saw her do earlier, watching footage of stuff going on the severed floor, right?
yeah.
And I mean, look, maybe every day she's been watching to see what her Annie has been getting up to. I mean, wouldn't you?
Mhm.
I would if I were
Yeah,
in her position, right? So, what if, in light of that, on the next day, she decided, screw this, I'm not going to go back in severed. I'm going to use my power to go back in with the Glasgow block in place.
yeah.
Next bit of evidence. When Helly gets off that elevator, there's no ding.
Correct. Yeah.
Is that a clue? You know, you could definitely factor that in here. Next thing, all right, and this is where I think it's important that if this were the case, in order to be able to defend it, sort of narratively or artistically, it has to be her all day.
Hmm.
When they are in the MDR office and they're talking about what Mark should do, Helly says, "But I'm her,"
Yeah.
twice. What if she's just straightforwardly telling the truth, right? What if she's not saying, "But I am the innie of the Audi Elena"? What if she's literally saying, "But Mark, look, I'm her again. I'm not I am her." So all of this would require, though, that Helena Egan, the Audi, has
Hmm.
come around to want to functionally be her innie
Yeah.
and come around in a way sort of against Lumen and on DeMarc's side, and I hate this, but that's the only way in which I could see it kind of making narrative sense.
Yeah. See that what you're talking about, that's sort of the piece of the pie that tastes best to me, right? The idea that Helena wants nothing to do with her father, wants nothing to do with Lumen, would almost prefer to have this different life, this life that is more segmented away from the pressures, the whatever it is that she faces as Helena. So I can see that and understand that that perspective.
But
It does complicate things that at the Ortbo, Mark couldn't tell a difference and, has fallen in love with and has been intimate with Helena and not with Helly, right? That does complicate things.
yeah, well, and further, I really think the reason why I say this theory makes me angry and I don't want it to be true is I really feel like if this ends up being the case, man, unless they manage to really, really pull it off well,
Yeah.
or even if they do, I just feel like it would undermine the ending of season two.
Yeah, I,
It
I
would undermine the emotional stakes of it and all of that
I
for me.
completely agree because we've heard Dan Erickson say this week on several things. It was always the intention to get to this point where Mark and Helly run off together. Now that just could be sort of putting up a smokescreen and sort of trying to divert us away from what actually happened. But to say that was your point, and then we find out, 2 years from now, actually that was never the point. It was always a point to do something else. That would be a little bit, I think, disingenuous. Not that they care about that, but I see what you're saying.
Yeah, or like I can't rule it out entirely as I've thought it through. Which another reason why this one sort of made me angry is I did not think about this at all until I
Yeah.
heard someone else say it. Right?
Yeah.
Like what wasn't on my mind at all until I heard someone else say it. And my first reaction was like, no, because I think it would undermine the emotional stakes and everything of the season two finale. But thinking it through, and as I just laid out the case, I could see a way in which potentially it could work, but only if it is along the lines of, think about it. Like Helena Egan's watching the footage, seeing her father tell her any that he doesn't love her. And now her reaction is, well, you know what? Screw you.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I've only been going along with all of this through those social pressures, those familial pressures, all of that. Screw you, screw Lumen. I also see that like a purer form of myself in my innie. I'm just going to try to like let go of all of those kind of repressive social expectations, and I'm going to go take her place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, if it
But
were
but so
Helena
then
scheming, then I'd be really, really unhappy.
yeah, but then yeah, this leads into another question, which we can get into later. Just yeah, I'm very intrigued by this theory, but I think that we're going to be right that this is Helly.
I hope so. Yeah,
Yeah.
I do. So again, don't want it to be true. We could spend more time on it, but let's move forward. Where would you like to go next in terms of?
How about one of my favorites that I've heard sort of percolating this week? We've talked before about, in season one, there's Mr. Grainer, there's Mr. Drummond in season two, but there's not much other security going on in this, sort of high tech, high pressure, got to protect our investment environment here. What do you think about the theory that all along Lumen was planning for, hoping for there to be some sort of uprising or rebellion from the innies, and this is all just part of the big experiment, and they actually do have a plan to sort of squash this, right? There's the innies rights, there's people rising up, we've got a band on our side, we've got the mammalian nurturables, but really in actuality, we wanted to see what would happen when we push people to their limits and they start to rebel.
It's hard for me to buy it because Drummond's dead, and I don't think that would be part of the plan.
Definitely not.
Mauer's freaked out.
Yeah.
Um, Jane Egan is, um, yelling cuss words into his camera.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I mean, could it theoretically be possible, it, the board, whoever the board is, that's clearly the top of the hierarchy.
Hmm.
That was another question we can kind of tie in here along the way, I guess. One theory out there is that the board is like a motherboard and somehow has the digital consciousnesses of CEOs past. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Um, who is the board? I mean, that's just a big question. So,
Yes. Yes.
could there be some way where you could tie those things together? And this is all part of an experiment, I suppose, but I kind of don't think so.
Yeah. They talk so much in season one, at the beginning of season two, about this illusion of freedom, or sort of the greatest prison is the idea that you're free, or that you have some sense of your own agency or freedom. I don't think this is sort of an allowed or controlled environment or experiment that they're running here. I think this is truly oh, we just never expected that people that we have been controlling this entire time would say, you know what, we are our own selves and we're going to rise up. They just never expected that to happen, at least at this level.
Yeah.
They certainly have had ways to deal with individuals who do certain things or have sort of, go off script. But in terms of everybody, the entire floor rebelling, no, they're not prepared for this.
Yeah, and the OTC at the end of season one messed things up because of the way now that any mark and outie marker have sort of shared information in an indirect way, but that I certainly I can't see where they would just be okay with Gemma getting away. Um, I think they really did care about
Yeah.
Cold Harbor and all of that, right? But we could tie this into another theory. You floated something like this, and I guess
Okay.
there's a big question to me about how exactly we might want to put it. But I do think there may be something here, and this would be it's often phrased as the theory that everyone in the town of Kier is severed or something
Mm.
like that. Um, you floated. I mean, I don't know if you'd want to put it that way, but something you did say in a previous podcast was more like, maybe everyone in the town is also cut off from the world or something. So I don't know. How would you want
Yeah.
to put the idea?
And I've been thinking more about it as we saw Chakai Bardo and what they were doing with Gemma and sort of the 24, 25 controlled environments that they put her in. There were different levels of severance for different things. But just that the idea that when they go up that elevator, that they're not actually free, that this is just
Yeah.
another layer of everyone's severance. And there's been sort of these things where this is not exactly gone to form since we first brought it up, but this idea that everywhere you go, there's just not many people around. The idea that everything is completely dated, right? That we're not this is not an advanced technological society that they are living in.
Well, except they have smartphones, right? So,
It's who has smartphones?
okay, fair.
Helena has a smartphone. I think we've seen, well, who had the smartphone in episode 9 when Mark was calling
Yeah,
Milchick?
Doesn't Mark have a smartphone there?
Yeah, that was
Or
either
Bill?
Mark's or Cobell's. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was
But
Mark's. I think it was in the
anyway,
car
yeah,
ringing.
but the overarching theory is that Kier, which is, we're dealing with, they've talked about real states, but there is no real Kier and no real PE, I think is the abbreviation for the state that they're in when they get their mail. So is this sort of a fabricated environment where they're actually still severed and not truly free when they leave Lumen?
Yeah, I think something like this could be the case and could be really interesting. I don't know if I quite think that it is that everyone in town is severed. Um, I don't know quite how to put my thought, but it's something like maybe the town is still a part of the office, something like that is
Mhm.
more what I think. Like you're not really outside of Lumen. I mean, we're already keyed into that a little bit because it's a Lumen town. It's named after Kier Egan and all of that. The only place we've seen is when Cobell went off to Salt's Neck.
Yeah.
Um, I get the feeling that within the world of Severance, Kier is also a bit geographically isolated.
Mhm.
I don't know where we are.
Right,
It is
exactly.
noteworthy that in Chikai Bardo, we saw other seasons because,
Yeah.
for a while I was thinking like maybe we were in the Arctic Circle or something, but we saw, like summer and fall mixed in there. So, um,
I will
yeah,
say
I don't know. I think,
Chikai Bardo throws a lot of wrenches into this theory because obviously you see all of these people milling around this college campus. Um,
yeah,
I get the impression that Mark and Gemma are both, living in this area pre Gemma disappearance, pre Severance, pre Lumen, and so they don't seem to have any effects or knowledge of things being done to them before this. So it's not like Mark has moved to a new state when Gemma passed away, and now he works at Lumen. They all still seem to be in the same area. So
it
there's
is.
a lot of things that point to this probably not being true, but who knows?
Yeah. I think, I mean, like he did move into a new place, right? He moved into
Yes.
the Lumen housing complex or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's go a step more absurd or outlandish. Apparently, some people theorize that Rickon and his friends are goat outies.
Have you've heard the bird attacking the back of the head theory? Is that what you're
Yeah,
referencing? Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
That
It's not a bird. It wasn't a bird. It's actually from the Severance chip somehow. Blah blah blah.
yes.
Rickon's
So
got a bunch of
and
goat
that
stuff.
in the first was this from the first non-dinner party
Uh,
all the way back in season 1. I can't remember what the exact episode was.
yeah, there was something in there. Yeah.
Yeah, but one of Rickon's friends talks about a bird that they own that um, attacked them in the back of the head, and that's why they have holes in the back of their head. So does that
Rebecca, I
actually mean
believe.
that this? Yeah, Rebecca. Yeah, that she actually severed, but she doesn't realize that she's severed.
And like part of the theory is that their names are weird for this reason, that he's actually Rick N or was Rick N, like Mark S.
Yeah,
But then, it's like, so however you put this exactly, like they're severed or used to be severed and don't know it anymore, or but people have also pointed out there's a lot of like goat iconography around Rickon. Um, There are those who are taking this in a different direction, of course. During season one, even people were speculating like maybe Rickon's a secret Egan. I
Yes,
don't know.
yes. There,
I
I
mean,
will. I'm remembering something specifically that I listened to this week, so we'll give it credit. This was Dan Erickson doing an interview on the Prestige TV podcast, and they asked him to, can you confirm or deny anything about questions that people have? And he got on. He said, "I can confirm that Rebecca does have a real bird, and that bird is very aggressive." He said, I will not deal with slander that there is no bird. There is a bird out there." Now, he said, "I will not confirm or deny if she is severed, but I can confirm that there is a bird."
yeah, I actually listened to that too. That was amusing.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know about all of this, but what I find myself more curious about, as I mentioned to you, is I did listen to the audiobook of the UUR that's out there. It's not a complete book. Part of me
Mm.
does wish that they would finish the whole book and like actually publish it where I could buy a hard copy and put it on my bookshelf, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but so I listened to the audiobook, which is read by Michael Chernus. So come on, you know.
Yeah.
And but the biggest thing that stood out to me is it's kind of subtle, and maybe it's just a joke about his kind of, faux erudite kind of demeanor, but he gets absolutely every fact wrong. Anytime he mentions anything that is a fact you could check, whether it's about like science or literature
Right.
or
Right.
but it's always like a subtle slippage, very much akin to how he says in the series, a Trojan's horse.
Trojan's horse.
He's
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
a little bit wrong. But it really started standing out to me because I don't know, I got the cultural knowledge. He's like a little bit wrong about absolutely everything. So is that just a joke? Is there any clue? I think it might just be a joke in a
Yeah.
similar way, like the dinnerless dinner and things like this. I don't know,
Just a
man.
commentary on people who, I mean, I've known people like this. I'm sure you have as well. People who are know-it-alls and have the answer to everything. So the guy who has the answer to everything, but everything is a little bit wrong. You can't get anything right.
Yeah, I mean, my reaction has always been like, "Oh yeah, I've lived in Brooklyn too." You
Yeah.
know, it's like, or people are like, "How are Devin and Rickon together?" I'm like, "Well, you haven't known a couple like that somehow, you know." Um,
Yeah.
so I always took it more as a critique of that kind of like Brooklyn bougie bohemian, whatever the term is that people used to use. But yeah. Anyway, more about Rickon. You want to talk more about Rickon? You're worried about
I'm
this as
good.
a dangling
I'm good
thread.
on the Rickon front.
I presume he's still out there. It is true he kind of disappears in the last couple episodes,
Yeah.
and I do wonder like what's the state of his relationship with Devin? Because the last
I
time we saw
agree.
Rickon, she was calling him out for selling himself out in terms of rewriting the book for Lumen, you know?
He's having to do all that on his own now. So that's what's taking him so long. That's what took him out of the story.
Yeah. So we'll see. Talking about innies and the idea of everyone being in severed or whatever. To tie this in, this is a question that I have. In the season two finale, Maurer, as he's running towards to try to stop Mark and Gemma, yells, "You'll kill them all."
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe we talked about this last week. Who
Yeah.
do you think he's referring to?
Oh boy. I kept the thought that kept coming back, and whether or not this is anywhere close, I have no idea, but just kept coming back to the idea of what are Helly, Irv, Dylan working on? Is it people? Is it other subjects? Are there people down there that are also being, um, their data slash consciousness being refined? There's one theory out there that, Mark and Gemma were chosen because of their close connection. As sort of, does it happen more efficiently, more effectively? Does it happen better because, someone like that does it versus, an A and B test where, Dylan's refining someone he doesn't know. And so is it just as effective, is it just as efficient? Sort of what's the test out there? So are they talking about the subjects? I mean, I don't know who else them would be in this scenario.
You know what I think? And there are a couple of possibilities, and it's an interesting question. But the most straightforward reading I could offer here is I think he's talking about all of the personalities in Gemma's chip.
Yep.
Um,
Good thought. Yeah.
that he's in love with. Of course,
Yeah.
you'll kill all the versions of her, right? If we're losing that ship, which is, I mean, part of it's really disgusting because they were planning to kill the physical woman anyway, right? So he's not actually referring to the physical woman who is Gemma. He's referring to like all the personalities in the chip somehow.
Yeah.
But is that how it works? So if that is how it works, then I mean it's kind of a big clue. Could he
And
mean?
is that an unintended consequence if you're trying to just create a chip that can sever specific things in certain circumstances? Do you, by doing that, then create a different personality for each person that is severed in that line of 25 things or whatever?
Yeah. So I'm not positive. It
Yeah.
did occur to me along the way here that any Mark doesn't seem terribly concerned about killing all of those innies. He has a general concern, but I mean, I guess, it makes sense. It makes enough sense,
Yeah.
right? I mean, like Jem has been held prisoner,
Yeah.
and so even
Well,
if,
I'd love to talk about Gemma a little bit.
yeah,
First question is the Gemma that's down on the testing floor who's not in one of the 25 rooms, the same Gemma that went out the escape door or the exit door on the severed floor. Those are the same Gemma, right? They both know Mark. They both recognize Mark.
I believe
Um,
so. When she's
okay.
outside of the door, when she's
Yes,
outside of,
outside of the door, right. So she's clearly one of the 25 personalities when she's in one of the rooms. She
yep,
is Miss Casey when she's on the severed floor. But when she's not in one of those rooms on the testing floor, and when she's outside the exit door on the severed floor, that's the same Gemma. I mean, I think that's the case. I just want to sort of set that baseline.
yeah, I believe that's true. And I would just say like,
Okay. Okay.
howdy Gemma, or just Gemma
Yeah.
Gemma.
And this was the
Um,
thing that we brought up last week. I'm just maybe I'm missing some of the logistics or layout of the building, but I'm not convinced that Gemma is yet safe or free, like maybe Mark S was hoping she would be once he got her out that door. She's Gemma, but is she gonna walk 20 feet the other way and find Devin? I'm just not convinced of that yet.
yeah, I mean, there's definitely space for them to go another way. It does seem like any Mark has to be saying, well, this is my compromise. And I'm imagining maybe they didn't even really talk about that. He
Yeah.
just made the demand, put me back on the severed floor. But when it comes down to it, he's willing to say, like, yes, I want to free Miss Casey. And it is not okay what they are doing to this woman down there.
Hmm.
And I'm on board with freeing her for sure. But now you're out the door, you're on your own, you know.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I think that's a fair point because he knows as Mark S, if he went out the door, he would not come back in because he would be there with
yeah.
Gemma. And that's sort of like this is the best I can do scenario. Right? I can't go any farther with you. I can't go up the elevator. I can't go out the door. And so, yeah, I've gotten you where, I told them I would, or where I told myself that I would. And so, yeah, you're on your own. Good luck getting out of the building. I know if you go up the elevator, you're going to run into what's his name up there. He's probably going to stop you. So maybe out the door is the best scenario to get out the building.
Yeah, I'm not positive, that we've seen exactly what her path would be to get out of the building.
Yeah.
But as I noted to you last week, there does seem to be a meaningful lack of security, as it were,
Yeah.
particularly of people who know who she is and would
Yes.
recognize that she's not supposed to leave. Because I
Right.
don't exactly think your average Lumen security guard would be like, "Oh, hey, that's the woman they're secretly keeping on the severed floor."
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I tend to think she'll be able to get out, but we'll see. We'll see. I'm sure that season three will pick up kind of right there,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know.
I
Um,
certainly hope so. It would be it would be a little discouraging to me if it was just like 4 days later and Jim and Devin are there hatching a plan to get back in or something. I'd like to see the immediate repercussions of all this.
I think it has to be because even though I've already speculated about the idea of, Occupy Lumen, to be
Hmm.
clear, I don't necessarily think that Mark and Helly have come to that quite yet. Like
Right.
I think that when any Mark, he's choosing Ellie, and it is more along the lines of, I don't want to die. I don't want to cease to exist. I want more time with this woman that I love, even if that is 5 minutes,
Yeah.
you know. Um, but when they start to think it through, they're going to have to like occupy Lumen. So I mean, it feels to me like it has to pick up pretty immediately
Yeah.
because if they leave and become their outies, then it kind of feels to me like the story's over, you know,
Exactly.
because why would
Exactly.
Mark ever go back in there and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
Um, I know that you've got something of a heart out today, but let's be sure. I think okay. Let's talk about Cobell.
Yes.
What do you make of the theory that some people have that she might possibly be Mark's mother?
What evidence do we have to think that that might be the case, or
She
evidence
cares
against it?
about him, you
Yeah.
know. Why was she doing this stuff, pretending to be Mrs. Selvig? She, has experience with babies. I don't know how much you read into
Do we have
that.
a timeline of when she started working at Lumen, especially on the severed floor? Was it before Mark got there?
I'm pretty sure that it was, so she was already
That's just a
there.
coincidence that,
Or no, I'm imagining she brings Mark in.
well, no, I mean, a coincidence that Jim and Mark are the people that they find out that they want, or just, or maybe if she is, she sort of points them in the direction of Gemma and Mark once they start giving blood and taking fertility tests and all that.
Yeah, I mean maybe it's all scheming, way in the background of getting Gemma and Mark involved and then kidnapping Gemma and I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah.
some people theorize that Cobell might be Mark's mother, and I don't know that there's a lot of great evidence for it. I suppose the only thing I wanted to say about this is I have heard multiple people push back on the basis of the age of the actors. At one level, I do think that's fair, right? Like Patricia Arquette's only a few years older than Adam Scott, but that doesn't necessarily mean the characters are the same age, you know?
Yeah, I don't think that's how
Um,
they're positioning it on the show, that they're close to an age.
I think that Mark Scout reads as a character. I think he reads as younger than early 50s,
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I
right?
would say they want him to be in his 30s.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And on the other side of things, um, Miss Cobell might read as older than Patricia Arquette is. I think she might be like 56 or something like this.
Correct. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I recall in one of the, I think it was on the official podcast when they had Patricia Arquette on, like, I think it was her idea for Miss Cobell's hair to be gray. She's like, I feel like this woman's hair should
Mhm.
be gray or whatever,
Yes. Yeah.
So I feel like there's a way in which Cobell reads as older than Patricia Arquette, and
Yeah.
Mark Scout reads as younger than Adam Scott. So if you're imagining something like Jane Egan impregnated Miss Cobell when she was a teenager, and Mark is the child, it could work. I don't necessarily
Yeah.
think it's true. I don't really think it's true, but it is a theory that's out there. I wanted to hit
Well,
on.
what is going to be true in future seasons is the idea of bringing Devin to the birthing cabins and Cobell saying she's one of James. That it is certainly going to be true that some people out there in this universe that we know are a descendant of Jay Megan and not just Helena. I mean, that certainly is going to be the case, I believe, since they opened that door.
Yeah, and then they double down on it by having Jane Egan say, "I sired others in the shadows." And then, I mean, there are also these questions like, who is Cobell's father? Who is Mark's parents at all? Mark and Devin's
Yep.
parents, we don't know, and so on and so forth. Similarly, in the other direction, of course, there's the theory that Helly is pregnant or what have you. We have talked about that before. I don't know if it's much of a theory, as it were.
Yeah.
Um, One question I had was whether they could do the OTC on Gemma. I think someone brought that up. I can't remember who I was
Th-
watching who
this is a
brought
great
that
question.
up.
If they can locate where she is, I'm glad you put this on here. If they can locate where she is, find some way to get her isolated, turn her on, they can just lead her right back into Lumen. She would follow them, presumably as
As Miss
Miss Casey,
Casey?
right? Yeah,
As Miss Casey? Yeah, maybe Casey definitely seems very
yeah.
pliant, very, very,
You got
pacific.
what happened at the end of Chikai Bardo, they just tell her, "Oh, you got lost as part, when you were looking at an art installation or something here. Let me help you get back to the floor," and they can just do that again.
Yeah, yeah. So another reason to occupy Lumen. Hashtag occupy Lumen. Uh, you can't let them get the control of the OTC, you know.
Right, right, exactly.
So um, let's
We
see. You've got
should
a couple other things. What else you want to hit on before
we
we're
should
out of
make
time here?
sure before we wrap up that we at least have a short conversation about Milchick and where do we think he
Okay.
heads from here? Because I think Ben Stiller and Dan Erickson have had some interesting thoughts this week about how they're not, it's not clear where his motivations are. Dan Erickson talked about how sometimes before you break away from something, you hold on to it the tightest. Sort of after this incident where he's locked in the bathroom and, sort of sees this group of people turn against him, is he now more pro Lumen than ever before, or is he ready to take some of these slights and disservices and ways that they've mistreated him and say, okay, I'm part of the Occupy Lumen movement now,
Or what if he just quits?
or just quits? Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's like, screw this. I'm gonna go get on my motorcycle. I'm gonna go.
Yeah, I was gonna
I
say,
I am.
turn in your leather jacket and motorcycle, and here's your final paycheck.
People have been talking about this a little bit. We've never seen Milchick at home or anything like that, and just put it out there. I imagine Seth Milchick at home, like listening to Miles Davis and making himself a gourmet dinner for one. Definitely single. Definitely single.
Definitely, absolutely,
Um,
100%. Yeah.
I won't speculate on his sexuality or anything, but definitely I think like he's the kind of guy who listens to good jazz and he eats good food, you know, and
Yeah.
he watches like the films of Jean-Luc Godard. He's a sophisticated guy. I love Jack. It is like it does all that track.
Do
But
you,
yeah,
just as a quick aside, do you think there's anyone who has done more for their career than Tramel Tillman in this show?
oh no, because he's just amazing. He just steals the
He is.
show.
I mean, he's 2 years away from being an A-lister that everyone has heard of at this point.
Yeah, he's great. So I don't know what Milchek does next. That was your question, right?
Yeah.
Definitely season two has laid the ground with him being kind of torn. We've said some things on the podcast here talking about him being in that kind of middle management position,
Yeah.
and that's where I think it actually could make sense for him to quit, right?
Yeah.
Because he's being left in a situation where now he's the only one, and they're going to put all of this pressure on him to get this any uprising under control or whatever. Um, or maybe he does say, okay, well, I'm gonna actually side with the innies here. I suppose that's a possibility. I don't
Yeah.
know. It'll be really interesting to see because another question you put on our sheet is about Cobell's endgame, and that's relevant too, right? I mean, I know we talked about this last week, and people can refer back to that for maybe a longer version of what I'm saying, but I'm definitely still suspicious of her and what is she up to and what does she want. So how does that all factor in?
Yeah.
Now we've talked about where does Milchick stand in the power struggle or structure of Lumen? Where does Cobell stand? And
Yeah.
where does Helena stand potentially, if that first theory we talked about has anything to it at all?
Where I'm placing my bets, if I had to, for the next season is Cobell is now anti-Lumen, has her own agenda to sort of tear that place down. Milchick, you need beyond just the corporation, you need an antagonist. Milchick is sort of this makes him more bought in, or they need him to do something to to make sure that the innies are not taking over things as they are clearly wanting to.
I see. I think more the other direction. Cobell is the villain.
Mm,
Um, and even in terms of what I just said, I realized, look, if it is Heliar, the innie, well, then she
mm,
needs to stay on the floor, as we talked about before. So she's neutralized. Helena's neutralized one way or the other, right? That leaves Milchick, Cobell, Jane, Maurer, the board, the nurse played by Sandra Bernhardt, who somehow we've never
yeah.
talked about. That's such an oversight. So it's a huge apology. She does a great job.
She does.
But it's not a lot, right? So I'm more imagining like, okay, well now Cobell comes back and says, look, I'm the only one who can handle this. I'm the one who invented Severance. I'm the one who understands what's going on. You
Yeah,
need to put me back in charge of the company now,
yeah.
or you're in
I can,
trouble.
I can see that. I can see that happening, certainly.
Whereas Milchek's more, he's either held hostage on the floor in some kind of middle management state trying to play negotiator, or maybe quits or something, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's what I think.
Well,
Um,
here's hoping we don't have to wait 3 years to find out.
Lots of indications that we won't, that they're already getting to work. So as long as everything goes well, and there's no um, world-ending catastrophe or anything like that, hopefully we'll get it. I don't know. I'm not going to be as optimistic as to suggest next year, or
Yeah,
but like maybe January 2027. How about that? That wouldn't be too bad.
yeah. Hey, there was something interesting in the official podcast that came out today where Ben Stiller was talking about the fact that after it had taken them a year and a half to make some section of the episodes, 7 or 8 of the episodes, he realized just how much time and effort and energy it takes to do this the way they want it to. So this is not we're going to pump it out in 6 months show. So yeah, it's probably early 2027.
Yeah, I would guess. And I know that we need to run here. I do want to just very quickly say something about the man in the hallway in season 2, episode 1, who's played by the same actor as the Shadow Mark, and just all of that stuff. I don't even have much to say about it,
Yeah,
but particularly thinking back in light of the season finale, these things strike me as seeds that they've planted that haven't sprouted yet. Like
yeah,
what's going on here, particularly with the fact that they put the guy in the hallway in the season premiere
yeah.
and then didn't really return to that at all. Almost like you need to go ahead and forget about that unless you're sicko obsessive or whatever.
Yeah,
Um, but all right, so it's been great. I
yeah.
think we'll wrap it up here.
Love talking about this show. Hopefully it's not too much longer before we can do it again.
Yeah, indeed. All right, so we'll leave it there. Thanks as always for listening. We'll be back next week. We're going to start talking about Black Mirror in anticipation of season 7, which comes out on April 10th. And we're planning to do some podcast episodes on the new stuff. But first, next week, we're going to do a podcast episode on the old stuff. Perhaps in particular, USS Callister, which we know there's going to be a sequel to, and maybe some other things that seem like, the trailers making us think of, and stuff like that. So hopefully you'll join us for that. Thanks as always for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, please do leave a good rating, review, all that good stuff. If you're on YouTube, hit the thumbs up, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out tvobsessive.com. You can follow the site on social media, search for TV Obsessive, and we'll see you next week.
All right, looking forward to it. See you then.